Hi, my name is Alex Early, and in my presentation I am going to discuss the bank wars. Introduction. The bank war was due to a lack of insight and common sense, and was ultimately something that would destabilize our country. The bank war was a political dispute between President Andrew Jackson and Nicholas Biddle. The bank war was very prominent throughout American history until recently. Not to mention the time at which the bank war took place was also of massive importance to the economy then, just as it is now. The bank war had many people involved, and it is one of the many reasons we are having such drastic economic problems in our country now. Those involved. Andrew Jackson was suspicious of the Bank of the United States. He blamed the bank for the Panic of 1819 and end to economic expansion after the War of 1812, and he also blamed them for corrupting politics with too much money. Nicholas Biddle was a man of power during that time as head of the Second Bank of the United States. He believed the bank to be a tool for inflation as a means to an end to gain more power. Thomas Jefferson co-founded the Democratic-Republican Party to oppose U.S. Secretary of the Treasury Alexander Hamilton's Federalist Party, which advocated for a strong central government with major powers over the economy. Henry Clay was a bystander during the bank war, but he had major influences on the outcome as well as censorship over the president's powers. Daniel Webster was a political rich from generous subsidies from the Bank of the United States and opposed Andrew Jackson on most issues. Prior events. The colonial economy of the United States during the 1780s was abundant in natural resources but lacked labor forces and had an economy of 30% of that of Britain's at the time of independence. During the American Revolution, America was in debt but received inflation in 1791. The French secretly supplied Americans in the Revolution with money. These loans were paid in full in the 1790s. In 1791, the first Bank of the United States was created. In 1793, a war broke out between Britain and France and their allies for 2 decades. The United States was a trading partner with both sides, and France resented it, and the Quasi-War of 1798 through 1799 disrupted trade. The Jefferson and Madison administration waged economic war with Britain in 1807 to 1812, and then full-scale war from 1812 to 1815. The first Bank of the United States ended in 1811. Bank War. Jackson's war on banks was a 2-step process. First, he had to pay off national debt by cutting government spending. The second step was to destroy the Second Bank of the United States. He began this by withdrawing federal assets and began wildcat banking by distributing federal funds to state banks. After effects. After Jackson left office, the Panic of 1847 broke out due to debtors not being able to pay their debts, causing a 6-year depression. The Third Bank of the United States was created in 1841, which was agreed upon by President John Tyler. After the Panic of 1847, the first cotton gin was created, allowing bigger industry, ushering in the Industrial Revolution. After this expansion towards the West in cotton, sugar canes, and tobacco grown through African slave labor would usher in the antebellum decades. The longest economic expansion of the United States was brought about in a recession-free period between 1841 and 1856. As a means to pay off war debt from the Civil War, the United States began using land grants. Effects on the modern economy. From 1890 to 1910, technologies became widespread and automobiles became prominent amongst the public. The economic downturn of 1906 brought an end to the expansion of the 1890s and brought about the Panic of 1907, which led to the establishment of the 1913 Federal Reserve Bank. A debt-fueled boom after the war brought about a housing bubble in the 1920s, but the debt reached unsustainable levels and the stock market crashed in October 1929. In 1932, President Franklin D. Roosevelt presented the New Deal. Government spending was increased and a banking crisis broke out. World War II followed and new jobs were created in war centers, causing the economy to grow rapidly. Inflation woes later broke out in the 1970s, followed by an economic boom in the 1980s. Then, in the early 1990s, there was a tax increase and government debt increased by 75%. The economy became worse in 2001, followed by a recession. The Great Recession began in 2008. The U.S. is now over $20 trillion in debt. Conclusions. The bank war probably benefited us as a nation as a potential learning experience that we are better off debt-free and with less federal government interference, but at the same time, it seems as though we did not learn at all and instead decided to increase government spending and gain more debt. Individuals like Jefferson and Jackson rejected the idea of a national banking system, and they were opposed by many. Yet what would our economy be like now if we had truly listened to them in the first place? The banking war was due to a lack of insight and common sense, and was ultimately something that would destabilize our country. This is self-evident in the economic roller coaster our country has experienced ever since. Is it too late to develop an alternative? Our country is a great one, but will economics be our true downfall? Alright, bibliography. Particularly helpful sources. Source number 1. This source was particularly useful because it had a thorough breakdown of Jackson's view of the bank war and how debt will affect our economy. Source number 2. This source was helpful because it gave an introductory view on not just Thomas Jefferson, but on his views of debt and federal banking that would not only affect the economy then, but affect the economy in the future. Source number 3. This source was helpful because it was a primary source and gave both points of view fairly accurately. Thank you very much, and that is my presentation for my final project.